I'm retired Brigadier General Mutambara. I am also an ambassador by profession. Seated to my immediate right is my wife, Esther Mutambara.
I'm Esther Mutambara. I was managing director of Chessman Garments before I accompanied my husband for a diplomatic post. The first post I had was Cuba. And when I was in Cuba, I just wanted to further my education. And I took my degree in law at the University of Havana.
Right, let me just take you on a short journey about myself. I was born in Shurugwi in 1951. And I did my primary education, part of my primary education in Shurugwi, where my father was working. And then I moved northwards as my father also migrated northwards with his profession. I went to Chivu, Range Clinic, and from there I went to Concession. From Concession I went to Bindura, where my father eventually retired. I attended schools in Shurugwi, in Masvingo, and also in Bulawayo, where I did my secondary education. In 1975, I decided that I wanted to go and join the armed struggle. I made the first attempt to cross the border through Mount Darwin, but that was aborted because the Rhodesian forces suspected that I was up to something, and they impounded my vehicle, and I was forced back. And then at that time, I was working as a council secretary in Neshuro in Mwenezi district. After that aborted attempt to cross into Mozambique, I went back to Neshuro where I was working, and then I stayed maybe for about 2 months, and then again I made the second effort to go to Mozambique through Chirezi, and eventually I went into Mozambique. When I crossed the border into Mozambique, that was before Mozambique attained its independence, but they were preparing to celebrate their independence. So when I crossed into Mozambique, I was arrested by Frelimo officials who were really in the bush. And I was sent back. Well, first of all, I was taken to Spungabera, where I was detained for about 3 weeks. And then they said they would send me back to Rhodesia then. When I went back, I decided that if I were to remain in Rhodesia, I would be arrested because I'd been away for quite some time. And because when I left, I was a prominent person, a council secretary, I knew that they were already looking for me. So I pretended that I was going back into Rhodesia. When the Frelimo soldiers left me at the border, I crossed back into Mozambique. And then I went again. I traveled, I think, about 60 to 80 kilometers inside Mozambique. And again, I was caught. When I was caught, I was detained for about a week. And again, they took me back to Mozambique, to Rhodesia, because they said that I was an agent of the Rhodesian forces, and I was there to spoil their preparations for their independence. Right. Now, the second time after I was sent back to Rhodesia, I went to Retulzok or Munyasa, where I pretended that I had no educational qualification at all. And I sought work as at the tea estate where I was picking tea for some days. When I got there, I met a friend who was called Musindo Geza. At first, of course, when he saw me, he thought maybe he had known me before, and I pretended that he had known me before. And then he offered to take me to his house. Then I told him that I had come from Mozambique and that I was afraid of being arrested. And he took me into his confidence and kept me for some days. After a while, he decided that if I stayed longer, there would be suspicion that I was up to something. So he said I should look for a job at the T-State. I did look for a job. They asked me whether I was educated at all. I said, no, I had no education at all. They asked me what job I could do. I said, no, nothing. I could not drive. I could not do anything. So I was given a responsibility to go and pick tea. I did pick tea for about also 2 to 3 weeks. And then I saw that there was an interest by some security agents in me. And I feared that any time I would be arrested. So I decided again to go back into Mozambique. But this time I took my friend with me and we went into Mozambique. When we got into Mozambique, and again I was taken to Espongabera where I'd been arrested the first time. And then they said, no, I think this man is genuinely interested in joining the liberation struggle. So from there we were moved to a refugee camp inside Mozambique. At this refugee camp, we stayed for, that's Shibababa or Machazi. We stayed there for some time. I was impatient to go for training. So together with some of my colleagues, we connived that we should run away from the refugee camp so that we could go and seek training. So we were about 13, and then we ran away from the camp in the direction of Beira. Before we could get to Beira, we were arrested by Frelimo soldiers. And then we were at Gorongosa. We were kept at Gorongosa. At Gorongosa, they decided that they would take us to a prison in Beira. So we went to Beira, where we were kept in prison for some time. When we were at Beira, after some time, after about close to a month, again a decision was taken that we should be repatriated, we should go back to the camp where we had come from. We were divided amongst ourselves. There was one group which said, well, we must comply and go back to the refugee camp. But I also led another group which said, no, we could not go back because of the consequences that we would face if we were to go back. So my colleagues who had agreed to go back were loaded into a lorry to go back. After they were loaded and we were just standing thinking that we were wishing them goodbye, then an order was given to the Frelimo soldiers to bundle us up and put us in the truck. So we were taken into the truck with police guard and we went to Chibababa, where we were thrown into a prison cell. But the long and short of it is that at a later stage we were taken away from the cell and we were sent back to the refugee camp. After a while, I was taken from that refugee camp and we went to Nyazonya. At first I thought we were going for training, but only to realize that I was going into another refugee camp. When we were at Nyazonya, we stayed there, and before Nyazonya was attacked, I was fortunate that I was taken away from Nyazonya and I went to Tembwe in Tete province, where I received my training. At the time that I completed my training, I was so feeble, there was no food, things were very tough. And when they were sending reinforcements back home, they decided that I was not fit enough to be deployed at that time. So I was taken to Chimoyo, where I did my specialist training in engineering. After that, I was chosen at first to be an assistant to the instructors, and then I was elevated to be an instructor in guerrilla warfare. I did train a number of comrades. And of course, some of the people that I trained include Sekeramai, Minister Sekeramai, and the late Comrade Debet Usheokunze. Those were some of the people that I trained. After I started training, each time we completed the training, I would take groups of those I had finished training with into Rhodesia then, and I would remain there for about 2-3 weeks, and then I would come back to Mozambique and continue with my training. Then again, was at the training camp, I was elevated to be the director of politics in Zanla. Zanla, which is the armed wing of ZANU. So I became a director of politics, and I was responsible for crafting the political lessons for our cadres. So I would train the comrades who were in the operational front, I would withdraw them and they would come to the rear. I would take the commissars in the training camps and they would come. And then I would also select some of our comrades for training in political orientation. After that training in orientation, we would redeploy them in the battlefield and then again try to follow up on whether our training in politics was effective. And of course, we went through various stages, including the time when Muzorewa was also prominent in politics in Rhodesia. And we would need to craft our orientation so that it became relevant to the time that we were. In 1977, firstly, I had been tasked to train a commando group in Mozambique. This commando group was comprised already trained cadres, but then I was giving them specialist training, commando training for special missions inside Rhodesia. At the time that I finished training that group, I then went back to my role as the director of politics. At the time that Chimoyo was attacked, I was situated at a base called the National Stores, which became one of the major targets of attack by the Rhodesian forces. So when this attack took place, I did help organize our comrades to resist that attack, which lasted for 3 days. And then after those 3 days of attack, I was responsible for the burials of our comrades. I'm the one who gave the official figure of the comrades who died at Chimoyo. But it was a gruesome activity. You would find that as we were burying our own, some would go crazy and we would have to change groups of our comrades so that we would continue the burial. In fact, after the first day of our burial, when we rested, we were woken up by jackals that were already digging our shallow graves and pulling out the bodies of our fallen comrades. But of course, the second day, we had to ask for the assistance of the Mozambican authorities who gave us equipment so that we could dig mass graves where we buried our comrades. Immediately after Chimoyo attack, it was decided that we should give a response to the Rhodesians, that they had not affected our morale and that we could still have the capacity to hit back. So we trained so that we would go and attack Chimoyo town. When we went on a mission to attack Chimoyo town, we were 450 and 50 female comrades, and we did march into Mozambique. We were walking at night and resting during the day. Although a reconnaissance had been conducted before we went for that intended attack, the fact that we were so many, even as we moved, we were creating roads where there were no roads. So it was very difficult to hide our presence. And in the end, the Rhodesians came to know that there was a big force that was advancing towards Mutare. It is when we were advancing to Mutare that I commanded my last battle, just about 18 kilometers from Mutare town in an area called Gandai. At the time that we were, on the day that we were planning that we would now move into positions to attack Mutare, I found that we had been encircled by the enemy on horseback, infantry soldiers, and so forth. And so the attack started on the base that I was located at. And it was a very, very ferocious attack from the air and from the ground. But we managed to resist that attack. In fact, at the end of the day, I had thought that probably I was one of very few who had survived the attack. But to my surprise, when it became dark and the planes had retreated, I tried then to look for our comrades, and I found that most of our comrades had not been harmed at all. We were missing 3 comrades whom I thought had been killed. Later, I did discover that, in fact, they were not killed. They'd only managed to get out of the base, but later on we were able to regroup them. But then what happened was, after that attack in Gandai, in Mutare, 3 days later, I was recalled to go back to the rear, and I was told that I was wanted in Maputo. So when I went to Maputo, that was the first time that I had an interaction one-on-one with the President Mugabe. In the past, I had seen him when he visited our camps in Chimoyo, maybe for meetings of the Central Committee, etc. And I could simply just see him at a distance and maybe respond to slogans at that time. But this time when I was recalled and I went to Maputo and told I was going to be the chief representative of ZANU to Ethiopia, that was the first time that I saw President Mugabe face to face. I did prepare and I went to Ethiopia. When I was in Ethiopia, Ethiopia was the headquarters of the OAU, Organization of African Union, which is now the African Union. And so it was a very big responsibility. Whilst in Ethiopia, we trained quite a number of cadres. At first, we trained 1,000 Zanla cadres. We were supposed to train 2,000 cadres, 1,000 from Zanla and 1,000 from Zipra. But at the time that we brought our cadres to Ethiopia, the ZAPU refused to send its cadres. They said they could not train at the same time with the Zanla cadres. So in the end, the first group that was trained was 1,000 Zanla cadres. But apart from this military training that our cadres were receiving, we also had some cadres that were training at the Ethiopian Aviation School. And so these were the two groups. But for us, the cadres who were at the Ethiopian Airlines were not a very big group. After they completed, they went back, and then it was decided that the next group that would be trained would come from ZAPU. And so there were Zipra cadres who came to train after our own cadres. When they came to train, just about 2 weeks after they were in the camp, some of them opted that they wanted to join ZANU and ZANLA. And they made an appeal to Mengistu that they wanted to leave the Zipra camp and join ZANLA. But because of the fact that I had known the instructors in the camp, which was known as TATEC, suspicion among Zipra cadres was that I had mobilized, because I used to enter the camp, they thought I was trying to recruit their cadres to join ZANLA, which was not, of course, the case. And at that time, an attempt was made to assassinate me, but it did not succeed. Anyway, I remained in Ethiopia from 1978. And then during the time of Lancaster, I also went to Lancaster House, where I attended the Lancaster House Conference. And then after the Lancaster House Conference, I went back to Ethiopia. And at that time, Comrade Tongo Gara had intimated to me that when he would be going back to Rhodesia after the ceasefire, he would take me with him to go to Rhodesia. So at the time that Comrade Tongo Gara died, I was actually expected that I would be recalled to go to Mozambique and join him on the journey back to Rhodesia. Now, after his death, President Mugabe then wrote me and said I should organize for the training of a bigger group of our cadres, just in case the ceasefire did not hold, because we suspected that since Comrade Tongo Gara died, maybe the comrades would refuse to respect the terms of the ceasefire. So I remained in Ethiopia. I negotiated with Mengistu, and he had agreed that he would, as a matter of urgency, train 5,000 ZANLA cadres who would go into Rhodesia if the need arose. Then the elections took place when I was, the first elections took place when I was in Ethiopia. President Mugabe insisted that I remain in Ethiopia to make sure that the program to train our cadres would continue. But he assured me that I would be back home in time for the independence celebrations. Okay, this program eventually did not take place, although we had been told that we could arrange to send our cadres to Ethiopia. So after independence, about 3 days before we celebrated our independence, that's when I jetted into Salisbury International Airport and joined in the festivities. After independence, because I was the chief representative of ZANU to Ethiopia, I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and I attended the first diplomatic course at Ranch House. And I was supposed to be assigned on a diplomatic mission. But then that's the time when the integration process was taking place in the army. And that integration process was not smooth. There were attacks between Zanla and Zebra cadres, and therefore there was a need to have someone who was respected, who could assist in maintaining the tempers of our comrades. So I was requested that I should briefly leave the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and go and join the army, because many of my comrades knew me because I had taught them and I had also commanded them in battle. And so they thought that I could be able to assist in the integration process. I did assist in the integration process. Initially, I had been told that I would be there just for a brief period of not exceeding 6 months. After 6 months, the integration process was not completed. So I was asked to remain again for a further 6 months. At the time that I completed a year in the army, I was then offered to be commissioned as a full colonel, which is a very high rank in the army. So I was commissioned in the army as a full colonel. And then my first responsibility, I was assigned to be a corps commandant of the Zimbabwe Staff College. Corps commandant because I was working together with a British colonel to command the staff college, so that I would understand him. Then I was sent out to Britain to attend the highest course, the Army Command course at Kimberley Staff College. I went there and attended that 1-year course. And it is during that time, of course, that I had the opportunity to meet personalities like the Queen and the husband, and of course many other British. On completion of that course, when I came back, I was then made the commandant of the Staff College, and the colonel with whom I had been working was removed. So I did run the Staff College on my own for some time. In 1984, I was then reassigned from the Zimbabwe Staff College, and I was sent to Masvingo, firstly as deputy commander of 4 Brigade. I was deputy commander for just maybe a month. The commander who was there was then arrested. You know, it was during the time when there were problems again of Zanla, Zipra, and so forth. When he was arrested, I was then elevated to be the commander of 4 Brigade and promoted to be a Brigadier General. That was in 1984. I commanded 4 Brigade, and in 1987, I went when it completed its training, and it was based in Bulawayo. So I became commander of 6 Brigade. But during the time I was in 4 Brigade and also 6 Brigade, I used to spend a lot of time commanding operations inside Mozambique. I commanded very successful operations, and in fact, most of the time after I had made my operations, I would be called back, and the President Mugabe would request that I come and brief him how I was able to command such successful operations. So I was in the army until 1989, when I opted to retire from the army. I did ask that I be retired from the army. When I retired from the army, the president said, well, he wanted me to start a national service program, which I did. But because at that time there were lots of problems related to the financial problems, etc., I did recommend that it was not the opportune time for us to continue with the national service program. So I gave my arguments to President Mugabe, and then he said, well, since you are a trained diplomat, you can go back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for reassignment. In 1993, I was given my first diplomatic posting to Cuba. I became Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Zimbabwe to Cuba, with multiple accreditation to Guyana and Nicaragua. I remained in Cuba for 6.5 years, and it is during that time that my wife also went to study at Havana University and attained a degree as a lawyer. When I left Cuba after 6.5 years, I was assigned to go to Russia. When I was in Russia, I had multiple accreditation to countries like Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Poland. I had that multiple. I was also ambassador to those countries. Again, I remained in Russia for 6.5 years. When I left, I arrived in Russia in 1999, and I left in 2005 in December. And I was then posted to go to Mozambique, where I was ambassador to Mozambique, where I became the ambassador to Mozambique for 8 years. And I was also accredited to Swaziland during that period. At the end of my 8-year stint, I had actually spent 21 continuous years as a diplomat, as an ambassador, without coming back to Zimbabwe. What the fascinating thing about my responsibility is that it exposed me to lots of experiences. On many occasions, I represented my government on international forums. So I gained a lot of experience on the workings of government through those opportunities that were availed to me. Then when I came back, although I had heard from my wife of the suffering that that was visited on our people by Zanu-PF youths, at that time I did not believe that it was true, because being a Zanla cadre and being one who was director of politics and one who was saying that we must create a very good relationship with the people and that we must never force our people to do things that they don't want, I could swear to my wife that no, there are only rogue elements. It can't be Zanla or Zanu cadres who are doing that. Now, when I came back to Zimbabwe, I saw it firsthand. And on a number of occasions, I used to write letters to President Mugabe where I would complain about the manner that our youths in Zanu were behaving. I would also narrate to him some of the complaints I had about the ministers and other functionaries in government. And from time to time, I would write and say, I think this was not proper. But anyway, be that as it may, after the period I left, I went to the farm, but I remained attached to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then that led us to the time that Dr. Mujuru was expelled from Zanu-PF. I took exception to the manner in which she was expelled, because my argument was that she was vice president of government, vice president of ZANU, and that Grace Mugabe had no authority whatsoever to ridicule a person who had been appointed by the president to be a vice president of both the party and government. So I took exception to that, and I made it plain that I was not happy about what had happened. Then because of that, when I saw that there was not going to be any change of heart, I decided that I would not continue to be a ZANU cadre. And I tendered my resignation from ZANU and made it public that I was leaving ZANU. And then at a later, I said I was going to join the Zimbabwe People First at that time, which was led by Dr. Mujuru. Because of the decision that I took, ZANU youths were organized to come to my farm in Bindura. And they came there and said that they were going to take the farm because the farm belonged to Gushungo. You know, it's an argument that I could not understand at all, because the farm never, ever belonged to President Mugabe. When we fought our struggle, we were fighting for the equitable redistribution of land, and the policy that we were enunciating was that those who had multiple farms, irrespective of the race or color, would have to give up some of their multiple farms and remain with a farm of their choice. And those who had farms that were too large would have those farms subdivided so that some of the land would be given to those who were in need. It was never a political issue that you would be awarded a farm if you were a crony of Zanu-PF or if you swore your allegiance to President Mugabe. During our struggle, when we chose President Mugabe to lead us, it was not because we wanted him to lead alone, but we wanted him to be our figurehead. We campaigned for him, and even as we were fighting the war, we made sure that we sold out his name so that he would become the leader of Zimbabwe. And it is because of those selfless sacrifices by the comrades that President Mugabe became president. And therefore, it is an insult for people to say that one fought for land to be given to ZANU. No. The farms were to be given to every Zimbabwean who merited getting land. So on that basis, I resisted that, and we had a standoff for maybe about 5 hours until later the police had to intervene, and then the ZANU youths left with a promise that they would come back to take the farm. And fortunately, up to now, nothing has happened. But in any case, I think now it is clear that to people that the issue of land has been politicized, and that instead of awarding deserving people the land is being given to people who swear their allegiance to ZANU. No, in fact, who swear their allegiance to President Mugabe. Because it is not good enough just to swear your allegiance to ZANU. You have to swear it to an individual. They have created this one center of power. Right, after I worked with Zimbabwe People First, we then had a similar occurrence as happened when I left ZANU-PF, where senior members of Zimbabwe People First were expelled from the party without consultation. I was a senior member in Zimbabwe People First, and when an announcement was made that some members, our senior members, were being expelled, we had never been informed, and I thought that was not in order, especially bearing in mind that one of the things that had motivated me to leave ZANU-PF was the manner in which Dr. Mujuru had been mistreated. And now she was doing the same thing to others. And again, as a matter of principle, I said, no, I could not continue under a leadership. I had not been expelled from ZANU-PF, and again, I was not expelled from Zimbabwe People First. led by Dr. Mujuru. But in both instances, I opted out of those parties out of a principle. The party that then remained as Zimbabwe People First was a party where we had agreed that Comrade Gumbo and Comrade Didmas Mutasa would lead a process to identify a leader for that party. We were agreed, a committee was set that we should have that process of choosing a leader. But of course, we made it very clear that it was not possible to retain the leadership of Comrade Gumbo and Comrade Mutasa because of their close association in the positions that they had held in Zanu-PF and the perception that it would be seen just as a continuation of Zanu-PF. So we agreed with them that they would lead the process of choosing a leader. That process went on, and our highest organ, the steering committee, carried out that process of choosing a leader. And then it was agreed that I should be the one to take over leadership of Zimbabwe People First. At that time, Comrade Gumbo, Comrade Didmas Mutasa decided that they would not respect that decision, which was contrary to the agreement that we had agreed as a party. And therefore, they intimated that if I was going to lead, they would opt out. But it's not to remove anyone, to dismiss anyone from the party. Those who wanted to leave on their own, they can do so. But if they want to come back, they're free to come back, just like we are willing to receive anyone from any party if they want to come and join our party. So that's the process that led us to my being the interim president of Zimbabwe People First. And I think if I can just at this stage end at that.
No.
Zimbabwe's biggest problem is Zanu-PF and its leader, President Mugabe, who at one stage we thought was a good leader for our country, but who over the years has shown dictatorial tendencies. But even worse, that leader is trying to create a dynasty in which Grace Mugabe maybe replaces him as president of Zimbabwe. That's our biggest problem. And the fact that he is able to fool people, firstly by making them poor, and then by giving them crumbs, influence them to show support, by busing them to rallies as we see even now, or promising them lots of things. And I think that really is the basic problem. There are lots of problems, structural problems in the economy, problems in many other areas, but our biggest problem at the moment is Zanu-PF and its aged leadership. Well, there are a number of factors which I can put across, which qualify me to lead this country. First of all, of course, I have the background of our liberation struggle, where I held very senior positions. And after independence, I've held very senior positions, which again have made me understand the intricacies of running a government. And also my exposure to the outside world made me see how other governments function. And then, of course, if you compare that with what is happening, where you find we have a country that over the years has brought down our economy to its knees. I am opposed to the question of corruption in government. And even over the years, when I say that I've been writing letters to President Mugabe, some of the letters that I wrote were condemning corruption in government, corruption in the leadership. And of course, that is a cancer that has destroyed our country. So I don't pay lip service to the question of uprooting corruption. I'm not tribalistic. Those who know me know I'm not tribalistic at all. In ZANU, whether people say it or not, there is a belief that certain people are made to become rulers of Zimbabwe. And tribalism is ingrained in Zanu-PF. If you are Ndebele, never ever hope to rule Zimbabwe. No, not under Zanu-PF. No matter how competent you are, you cannot. So the parameters or the yardstick for choosing a leader in Zimbabwe is based on other criteria that is not democratic. I am opposed to any form of violence, and I have been very strong in my condemnation of violence. And I have never in my life within Zanu-PF, especially after independence, been involved in any form of violence. What I was involved in, of course, was the fight for our liberation. But never did I condone corruption. And that, again, is what I will bring into our leadership. It's not just good enough to condemn corruption, but you have to make sure that you prevent corruption from taking place. And what is happening in Zimbabwe, there are so many things, the way you look at our economy, the policies that have made Zimbabwe a pariah state, all those things, we have to be reversed. We cannot have a situation where we have a country that lives in isolation. So those are some of the things that honesty for me is important in any leadership. And also, a leader cannot be there forever. You cannot create a life president or whatever. The cult, the Gushungo cult that has been created in Zanu-PF is not sustainable. And I'm also averse to creating a similar situation in Zimbabwe People First and in our government. So if your president serves 2 terms at the most, one has to leave and leave room for others to take over.
For these and other stories, visit our website www.263chat.com. Follow us on Twitter @263chat and like our Facebook page 263chat.